It's been about 3 months now since I went over to the OM System Micro Four Thirds camera setup. So I thought after 3 months, an opportunity to come back to where that particular journey started, here at Fondo Natural Park, do a bit of photography and talk about my thoughts on this setup after 3 months of use. I hope you'll enjoy the video. If you do, and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Let's start off with the reasons that I often see people putting forward for not going for this system. And the first one is megapixels. It's only a 20 megapixel sensor. And a lot of people seem to think that's not enough, particularly in a world where 30, 40, 50 megapixels is becoming more and more common. But to be honest, 20 megapixels, at least for what I want to do, is actually plenty. I know I can make an A2 print, or I can have an A2 print made of a 20 megapixel image and it will look absolutely fine. I think back in England years ago I had a much larger than A2, I think it may have been even an A0 print made from a 12 megapixel image that had been cropped. And that looked absolutely great. So I'm not worried about 20 megapixels at all. And let's be honest, most of us don't print really, really large. Most home printers are A4, A3, maybe A3 plus. If you're really into your printing, maybe you'll have an A2 printer. And you can do that with this easily, even if you're cropping the image down, which is, often the case with kind of wildlife images. So I don't see the number of megapixels as being a huge concern for this camera system. One of the other reasons that people often have for not liking these cameras is a perception that their low light, high ISO performance is bad, that there's lots of noise. And I guess logically you would think there would be because the sensor is so much smaller. But to be honest, I've shot images with this camera in the last 3 months at ISO 3200 and seen almost no noise, providing the image is properly exposed. And what little noise there is has easily been removed with, just a little bit of either Lightroom denoise or topaz denoise, which is my preferred denoise solution. I've also shot ISO 6400 and had very little problems with noise as well. So I think any concerns about low light, high ISO performance on this is not something I would ever worry about. And I'm sure I could shoot at higher ISOs if I wanted to. So with those two most common objections out of the way, what do I really think of this? Well, let's talk first of all about what I wanted to get from a new camera system. I wanted to increase the range of focal lengths that I had available considerably without ending up with kit that was so heavy that I just couldn't carry it around because of some back problems that I've got. With this setup, I have got a significant focal length range from 8mm all the way up to 400, and bearing in mind in full frame field of view terms, that's 16mm to 800mm. So that gives me a tremendous amount of flexibility to be creative, to get close to wildlife, but also to shoot, you know, big wide vistas and wide angle scenes and use that kind of perception of exaggerated perspective that you get with wide angles. And I found this kit nice and lightweight. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not as light as the little Canon M50 was, but that's mostly because of, you know, like this lens, for example, which is quite heavy. But even so, I'm able to carry it around for, you know, several hours at a time without any worries at all. So from that point of view, it's worked out really well. But of course, I was also thinking about things like image quality. I was thinking about the additional features that this has got, things like improved image stabilization, things like high resolution mode, animal tracking, autofocus and things like that. So a word on those things coming up. So as far as the kind of stuff that I'm doing today, the autofocus on this seems to be doing an excellent job of locking onto birds. There are occasions when it misses, but I think that's mostly down to me. I think I'm kind of wobbling ever so slightly and perhaps not keeping the bird in the right place in the frame for the autofocus to stay locked on. And I may have to play around with the area settings to accommodate that. I'm using the subject detection, and I say that's working really well, and I do seem to get a high percentage of hits with some failures. Today I'm actually playing around also with the Pro Capture mode, which basically means you can half press the shutter button and it will keep recording images to the buffer until you either press the shutter button down, in which case it puts them onto the card, or let it go, in which case it deletes them. It's supposed to be very good for capturing action, and I think I've got a couple of shots where that has worked out quite well. The other thing that I've just had a very quick play with today, but I'm not entirely convinced about, is the built-in 2x digital teleconverter. What that's supposed to do is basically create a 20 megapixel image, but with the equivalent of double the focal length. Now obviously this means it's in some way cropping in and expanding the image, so I'm not sure how that's going to work in terms of you know, creating unpleasant artifacts or anything like that. But I've got it set up that if I'm shooting in that mode, I'm also shooting the RAW file as well, so I'm getting a RAW and a JPEG. The JPEG being the 2x crop, or the 2x zoom, or whatever it is, and the RAW being the normal view. So I've always got the RAW file if I want to go back to it. And I'll probably do more on some of these features in some future videos, depending on how things work out. Now this system has some really interesting additional features, special features, computational photography. This is always a problem. As soon as I start talking to the camera, something happens and I miss it. This camera does have some very interesting computational photography options, and I've barely scratched the surface of what it can do. I mean, the image stabilization is excellent. I managed an 8-second handheld image in a previous video, and it was perfectly sharp, although I did brace myself against the sign. And I've shot half a second, quarter of a second, up to about a second, just kind of normal handheld. And I've had no issues with that at all. It's been pretty easy to do. So the image stabilization is great. I've only had a very brief play with the high resolution mode when I did some photography of the moon, and I will definitely be doing more of that in the future. And if you watched my last video, I think you'll probably know how impressed I am with the in-camera focus stacking, which is really, really good. Although, again, more practice is required to really make the most of it. Another thing that I like on this is the ability to program in, you know, like some presets, if you like, some controls. So I can have one set for when I'm shooting like a more sort of landscape or urban scene, to do a single shot, manual exposure, get a preview of it straight afterwards, that kind of thing. Or another one for wildlife, which, like I'm doing today, I'm using Pro Capture, or a very fast frame rate, fast shutter speed, auto ISO, although I am shooting everything else manual. But just the ability to dial in, you know, to have a setting that I can just quickly click onto and it's set for what I want to do, is really useful, particularly for somebody like me who's continually changing the kind of photography that I do. So coming out for photography today, I just clicked it onto Custom 2. Custom 2 gives me auto ISO, manual exposure, subject tracking, set for birds in this case, and Pro Capture. So would I recommend this setup? If it suits your kind of photography, absolutely yes. If it doesn't, absolutely no. I don't think there is one perfect camera system for everybody. I do a lot of different types of photography. I don't want to carry a lot of weight. I like to shoot handheld. I'm not too worried about megapixels. So yes, I would recommend it for somebody like me. But for somebody that does perhaps more traditional landscape photography, that does most of their shooting on a tripod, that isn't worried about carrying a lot of heavy weight around, maybe something of full frame or medium format with lots more megapixels would be a better option. But for me, this is working out really well. Oh, and by the way, this is in no way sponsored or anything else by OM System. I bought this kit and I'm just sharing my opinions on it. So the wind is getting up and the afternoon is getting on, and I think I have to head for home soon. I've taken a ridiculous number of images, as is often the case when I'm photographing wildlife of any kind. So it's going to take me a little while to sort through them. You'll already have seen what I got, and I hope you've enjoyed looking at the images, being out with me today, and my thoughts on this camera setup. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, maybe share it on social media, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. And if you're new here and you've enjoyed this, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. And until next week, bye.